Ladies and gentlemen, our next topic is a very sobering and, yes, frightening topic, and that deals with human trafficking. Unfortunately, human trafficking is an issue that is increasingly present in our cities across this country. In most cases, it involves at-risk females who are being controlled against their will and used in a variety of crimes, usually those dealing with prostitution and with narcotics. Law enforcement cannot do this alone. It is a priority, but needs the full community support to help address it successfully. This morning, we're fortunate to have a tag team joining us this morning, and that is Director Larry Zwig with the MBI and also Lieutenant Mike Gibson with Orange County Sheriff's Office and also with the MBI. I'm going to introduce both of our speakers, and then Larry Zwig is going to begin our presentation. Director Zwig is a sworn director with the Orange County Sheriff's Office and is currently assigned as the director of the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation. Now, the MBI is an investigation unit of 17 local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, a task force that operates primarily in the 9th Judicial Circuit here in Florida. MBI is a permanent multi-agency task force. It was founded in 1978. It specializes in investigations dealing with narcotics trafficking, organized crime, racketeering, gambling, violations of adult entertainment codes. Now today, the MBI operation is recognized as one of the most successful and longest-running law enforcement task force operations in the United States. To begin our presentation on human trafficking, please welcome Director Larry Zwig.
Thank you. All right, good morning. I feel like I'm in church. Everybody's sitting in the back. I got all these seats open up front here. First of all, I want to say thank you for coming today, and Sheriff, thank you for inviting me to Mike and I to make this presentation today. I also want to thank you for all the support that you give MBI, that you've given in the past, and you're currently giving us, especially when it comes to these human trafficking investigations that we've started to do over the last few years. And I know there's many other governing board members, chiefs, and that are here today, and I want to thank you as well for all the support that you've been giving MBI. What we're going to do with this presentation today is we're tag teaming it. We divided it up. First, what I want to do is talk a little bit about MBI, what we do, and what we're currently doing with human trafficking investigations. Some statistics I'm going to show you, and show you a little bit about the typical type of investigation that we do when it comes to human trafficking. And then the second part of the investigation, Mike Gibson, Lieutenant Gibson, who is my vice commander, he is going to tell you a little bit about human trafficking, the crime itself, and how some of these victims get to the point where they become victims of human trafficking. Now, MBI has been around since 1978. Currently, we have 17 different law enforcement agencies that are part of the task force. And it includes local police departments, the Sheriff's Office, FDLE, and then also federal partners. We also have FHP is also part of the task force. So there's 17 different agencies. So this makes it the perfect place for us to conduct these types of investigations, because this crime, a lot of times the victims are transported from city to city, sometimes state to state. So it allows us to leave the 9th Circuit and go anywhere in the state of Florida with FDLE, or if we need to go to other states, we go with the FBI. So this is a great place and a great organization for us to be able to do these types of investigations. There are approximately 50 agents assigned to the task force. A majority of them, about 2/3 of them, actually about three-fourths of them, work narcotics trafficking investigations, and that's organizations that are bringing drugs from anywhere from out of the country or other areas of the country here to Central Florida and then distributing them to drug dealers, the street dealers. So that's what the majority of the agents at MBI work. But we also have a vice unit which investigates vice crimes, human trafficking, and organized crime. Now, the vice unit in 2012, we had 1 lieutenant, 1 sergeant, and 4 agents. And they were responsible for working organized prostitution and escorts, adult entertainment regulation, illegal gambling investigations, racketeering. And then we started to investigate the human trafficking. And when that happened, we knew we needed more investigators because it became very busy. So today we have a lieutenant, we have 2 sergeants, and we have a total of 8 agents that are assigned to the vice unit at MBI. So this gives us a lot more ability to do these types of investigations. There was a need, and the governing board really stepped up and provided the manpower and the resources that we need to do this. Before we go any further, I just want to make the distinction here. Sometimes there's confusion between human smuggling and human trafficking. Human trafficking is an offense against a person, and it focuses on coercion and exploitation. The victims can be citizens or non-citizens, but it's an offense against the person. Smuggling is where it's against the U.S. border. It's a crime against the U.S. border. It's bringing illegal people, undocumented immigrants across the border into the country, and where you have that person is agreeing to be smuggled into the country. So there's a difference between smuggling and trafficking. Human trafficking involves the exploitation of people for forced labor or commercial sex. And you don't have to have movement. A lot of times they're moving them from city to city or state to state, but you don't have to have movement across the border into the country for it to be human trafficking. And the main thing here is the victims are controlled, utterly controlled. Their identity, their personal belongings, and their body is controlled. Just some numbers I want to throw at you. Nationally, the state of Florida is number 3 in the country. And this is based on the National Human Trafficking Resource Center in Washington and their tip line. There's a national tip line that's set up, and these statistics are based on the number of calls that come into this trafficking hotline. In the state of Florida, Orange County is number 3 behind Miami-Dade and Broward, based on the same tips that come in. And these statistics are from 2009 to 2013. Hillsborough is close behind us. And these are some statistics from MBI. And remember, we really didn't start tracking these crimes until recently, over the last few years. And this year, 2014, is the first year that the state of Florida required law enforcement agencies to track the UCR statistics that the major went over earlier. Now human trafficking is also being tracked. The human trafficking tips that we receive, you can see they've been increasing over the last 3 years. We're at, it's over 108. I think I turned this into this PowerPoint presentation in a couple weeks ago, and the numbers have already changed. Of those tips that we received, the ones that we've gone out and verified and taken a look at and actually have found that there is human trafficking going on, those numbers have been increasing as well. And as a result, the arrests have been increasing over the last 3 years. This year, actually, since I turned this in, we've made 5 more arrests, and that's at 34 is the number of arrests that we've made for human trafficking. And the years, we still got another quarter to go. So the question is, why are these numbers increasing? I get that question all the time. I also get the question, why here in Orange County? Well, remember, we have our basic population here in Central Florida, but we also have a service population of tourists, folks coming in for conventions, major sporting events. And unfortunately, some of the people that come for those events also come here for prostitution and become the demand for this. One of the reasons it's also increasing, these numbers are increasing, is because of the internet. In the past, prostitution mainly took place on the streets, and it was out wide open. Now, there are several websites that pimps use, prostitutes use to advertise, and some of them feel safer doing it this way. They don't have to walk the streets. They can be on the internet, get a hotel room, get a house, have them come to them, or they go to the Johns as well. So the internet has really contributed to this. One of the other reasons you see these numbers increasing is the awareness. A lot of stories coming out in the media, not every day, but you see them very often. And so the public is becoming aware of this issue in the community. Another reason is the law enforcement training that we've been doing. We've tried to change the mindset of officers. I can tell you when I was working the streets, when I was with OPD, we would work the trail, we'd get complaints. I mean, the chiefs and the sheriffs a lot of times, and the communities on the South Trail, they get complaints all the time of prostitution, and we get the orders, go out there and take care of this problem, make arrests. So we would go out and we would set up operations, or we make arrests, but we really never looked at why this girl was on the street, who she was. It was basically make the case, take them to jail, and move on. We didn't really look at the way that they could have been victims. We didn't ask them the questions about how they got here, or was somebody making them do this. Now things have changed. We kind of look at it different. When we do these operations, the street prostitution operations, we have people that specifically their assignment is to sit down with these women and talk to them and interview them and see if we can figure out what is happening here. Is there a pimp in the background? Is there somebody else that we should be looking at? And another reason the numbers are increasing is because of the proactive enforcement that we've been taking. Let me show you a video here, and this will give you an idea of what our typical human trafficking investigation looks like.
Eyewitness News uncovered local places where investigators say women were trapped and forced to have sex for money. This major human trafficking ring was just brought down in Orlando.
Investigators say 3 victims were rescued and 6 people are now facing trafficking and conspiracy charges. On Eyewitness News at 5, we told you Rosny Jean-Baptiste is accused of trafficking women and beating them when they tried to escape. New at 6, we just got the mugshots of these 2 men who investigators say were doing the same thing in a ring that stretched from Fort Lauderdale to Miami to Tampa and finally Orange County. Channel 9's Carla Ray was the only reporter to get these new details. And Carla, none of these arrests would have been made if one brave woman had not escaped when she had the chance.
Yeah, investigators say that woman got out of a hotel room in this hotel behind me when she was left alone for just a few minutes. And according to these court records, she had been trafficked in hotels just like it all across Orange County and even hidden in a residential neighborhood. Inside this Pine Hills home, investigators say women being forced to prostitute against their will were held between hotel stays and clients.
You know, I was wondering when they was going to do something. I didn't know what all those girls were for.
Neighbors suspected what MBI agents confirmed, a statewide human trafficking operation that was run out of this home and Orlando hotels. Rosny Jean-Baptiste was first arrested last month and was just given new charges alongside his brother, Marking, and another alleged pimp, Theron Luke.
Both sides of the streets were lined with police cars, and there was a SWAT truck in their yard.
A woman rescued from this extended stay America hotel told investigators she was trafficked from Fort Lauderdale to Miami and then Tampa to Orlando, required to stay in this home with other women who were being sold online through Backpage and other escort websites. We found out she was forced to work in at least 5 Orlando hotels, including this Red Roof Inn off West Colonial. This extended stay in the middle of a business park and in the middle of thousands of tourists on busy I Drive. New court records show one room inside the home was dubbed the beating room, full of wire hangers used to hit women who disobeyed their alleged pimps. And to give you an idea just how established this group was, Marking Jean-Baptiste, who is Rosny Jean-Baptiste's brother, was so successful as an alleged pimp, he had a Maserati, and he even tattooed his name on some of the girls who were working for him to brand them. Reporting live in Orange County, Carla Ray, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
All right, so remember some of the things that you saw in this video. When Mike does his presentation, we're going to bring some of these things up again. Transporting to multiple cities. The internet ads, Backpage, you're going to see that again and again. The beatings and the threats, the tattooing and the branding. Just remember those when we get to Mike's presentation. Another thing I got to mention is a lot of times you see these stories on the news and we're at a hotel on I Drive. Well, it doesn't just happen on I Drive. Like the reporter said, it happens at hotels all throughout Central Florida. Wherever there's a hotel that somebody can set up at, or they respond to where a customer has gotten a room at. It doesn't just happen predominantly in the tourist area or down on I Drive. It happens in lots of areas. So what does our typical victim look like? Well, most of them have low self-esteem, no doubt. History of physical or sexual abuse. A lot of times they're runaways. They're coming from bad situations, foster homes, or just a bad situation at home. Drug abuse, almost always. Drugs or alcohol. If they weren't addicted to them before they ran away and got on the streets, if they get caught up with one of these pimps, that's part of how they do business. They get them addicted. Dysfunctional families, talked about that. Foster groups, group homes, very common in our victims. And the homeless and the runaways, they're very high risk for recruitment. I can tell you, we've talked to one of our victims. It was a young girl. She was 16, came down, got on a bus, ran away, got on a bus, came down here from Jacksonville. And when she got off the bus here in Orlando, it didn't take but 5 minutes, and there was somebody that was approaching her, and it ended up being a pimp that got her caught up in prostitution. So besides the tips that we get, and by the way, those tips come from several sources. They come in anonymously from Crime Line. They come in from other law enforcement agencies, especially since we've been doing all the training that we've been doing. We've been getting a lot of call-outs from Orange County and OPD and other agencies. We also get it from the national tip line as well. So besides those tips that we get in, how else do we work these aggressively, proactively? Well, one of the ways is the internet. Like I said, just about every one of these groups and these pimps uses the internet to advertise. And what we do is we do escort operations where we go on the internet and we look for certain signs. Of course, we're looking at the pictures. Sometimes they're real pictures, sometimes they're not. But we're looking for the girls who look like they're underage. And those are the first ones that we make the phone calls on, try and make a case on. We do these operations pretty frequently, and probably, I would say, the majority of them, we don't, or the people that we arrest, the girls that we arrest, aren't necessarily being trafficked. There's several of them that, yes, they decide to make bad decisions, decide they want to be prostitutes, and they advertise themselves, and they go to jail for it. But occasionally, every once in a while, we will find a victim of human trafficking. We were able to make a case and set up on the pimp and catch them in the act and begin our investigation from there. We also do undercover operations where we target the Johns. We do the supply, but we also do the demand. So we try and keep them guessing. You never know when you're answering an ad on Facebook or Backpage if it's going to be an undercover agent or it's going to be a prostitute. So what happens once we make the case? And remember, these are pretty intensive investigations, because once we get the victim that comes forth to us, or we catch her, arrest her, and interview her, and we find out that she's being forced into this, we interview her, we get the whole story, and then we've got to go back. The agents have to go back and do an exhaustive investigation. They got to go back in time, because a lot of times that's all you've got is that victim. And sometimes when you go to the prosecutors, they don't look like they're the greatest witnesses having to go to trial. So we've got to go back and corroborate everything that they've told us. We've got to go back to the hotels where they were forced to prostitute. We've got to go back to the internet ads and find out who placed them, what credit card did they use. There's all sorts of things, and I don't want to go into all the details, but tools that we use. But it takes a long time to make a case to where you can bring it for prosecution. And sometimes we just can't make that case. The victim's not willing to cooperate, and we get her out of that situation, and we get her in the social services that she needs and get her back home where she needs to be. And unfortunately, we can't make a case, but we identify who that pimp was, and we're going to be working on him in the future. So sometimes it doesn't lead to arrest, but when it does, what's been happening? Well, we're lucky here in Central Florida to have these cases being prosecuted on 3 different levels. The cases that we're able to make where they don't go outside, that they're here in Central Florida, they don't leave the jurisdiction, they don't go to other cities, don't go to other states, where we've been able to get successful prosecutions here in the 9th Circuit. Also, there's some cases where they go to different cities, like that video, where they go to different cities around the state, multi-jurisdictionals, multi-circuits. Statewide prosecutors has been interested in prosecuting successfully those cases for us as well. Recent example I can tell you is we had an individual a couple weeks ago that we arrested. There were 3 people in that organization that were going up to Ocala, to the women's prison up there, and recruiting inmates. And then when they would get out of prison, they would be there to meet them and give them a ride back here to Orlando, where they were hooking them on drugs and prostituting them and advertising them on the internet. And then, of course, the U.S. Attorney's Office as well. There's been a couple in the news here. We've had successful prosecutions, got convictions, and in those particular cases, one of them was some gang members who were prostituting underage girls. One was a 14-year-old girl here in Orlando, And then they went to Louisiana, and from there they went to California. And we were able to follow up and go and find them in California where they were doing the same thing, arrest them, and they were successfully convicted. So we've got a lot of cooperation from the prosecutor's offices here in Orlando. Have been very successful coming up with successful prosecutions. I talked about the training that we're doing. We've gone to the Orlando Police Department and the Orange County Sheriff's Office are the biggest agencies that every sworn officer or deputy in those agencies has gone through the 1-hour block training that we have done for them. And I can tell you, I can give you instances. There were a couple in the Orlando Police Department, some officers that had gone through the training, and the very next week they had done a traffic stop down on I-Drive, I believe it was, and had come across a girl who was in the back seat of the car with a couple known pimps that we knew, and we were able to make a case on them based on they saw something and had been in this class and knew something wasn't right, made the call, and we made a successful case out of that. We also do training sessions with the community. In this particular picture, there's one of the Central Florida Hotel Lodging Association. We did a panel for them last year, and with them, cooperating with them, they were able to help us provide backpacks. You might have heard this story where we've gotten several backpacks with girls' clothing, personal hygiene items, and things like that. Because a lot of times when we do these type of investigations, and you've got this underage girl, and she's wearing, she looks like a prostitute, and we give her one of these backpacks, and they've gone into the bathroom, cleaned up, put on a sweatpants, sweatshirt. She comes out, and we're like, holy cow! It looks like a totally different girl. It's a little girl. So it's been a tool, it's been something that they've given us that has really been helpful. We also do training in cooperation with FDLE for investigators throughout Central Florida to come. We do it once a year and basically talk about the investigations, trends, making contacts, who you can call and who you can talk to. And these are some of the other groups that we've been doing some training with. And last of all, before I pass it off to Mike, one group that has been essential to us is the Greater Orlando Human Trafficking Task Force. And this is a group of private and public and also several different agencies that help us. Because once we get a chance to take this girl and pull her out of that situation, we need to get her in counseling, in substance abuse types of things. We need to get her stable so that 1 year down the road when we go to trial, we have her ready to testify because it's so important. So that's one of the things that they really help us with. Once we give them a call, sometimes in the middle of the night, they come out and they're a great help to us. So from there, I'm going to pass it on to Mike. And Mike's going to talk about understanding human trafficking.
Good morning, everybody. Again, my name's Mike Gibbs. I'm a lieutenant with the Orange County Sheriff's Office. I'm assigned to the Metropolitan Bureau of Investigation and in charge of the Vice and Organized Crime section. Thank every one of you for taking time out of your busy schedule to attend this crime summit. It's very important in the partnership between the citizens and law enforcement that you're here and that you get an understanding as to what we do and we get an understanding as to what some of your concerns are. We're going to continue along the lines of human trafficking. We're going to go a little deeper into explaining to you what is human trafficking, some of the indicators that we look for in human trafficking. We're going to talk about something that few want to talk about, domestic minor sex trafficking. We're going to talk a little bit about who are these predators, who are these guys that are dragging these females and males in some cases into this world of prostitution. We'll go into a little bit more onto the characteristics of the victims of human trafficking, and then we'll talk about some very basic resources that we have at our disposal here in law enforcement. Human trafficking, what is it? It's the acquisition of people by improper means such as force, fraud, or deception with the aim of exploiting them. It's no more difficult than that. Some of the indicators we look for and we see in victims of human trafficking, they appear submissive or fearful. They have injuries from beatings. You'll see the black eyes, the bruising on the arm, the bruising on the necks. Tattooing, branding, and scarring, and by the way, tattooing, branding, and scarring as an indicator of ownership. It's how they take control and begin to own these victims of human trafficking. Presence of a third party, could be a male or a female, and they want to do all the communicating. They want to do all the interpreting and talking for this suspected victim of human trafficking. Of course, under the influence of drugs and alcohol, very common indicators. And the list, by the way, goes on and on. But those are some of the more obvious ones that we look for. You watched a video earlier of Marquine Jean-Baptiste. Take a look at the photo up in the top left. If you notice, you probably can't see it. I'll tell you what it says. It says Mac, M-A-C, Magnificent. His nickname was Mac. He stamps his name on this female as a sign of ownership, and then he begins the process of prostituting her out. And again, that's again part of the process of breaking her down, taking her identity from her. Notice the black eye. Notice the redness around the neck. She had just gotten beaten the day before. We have the video. They like to take videos of the beatings. She got beaten the day before for not giving the right amount of money to her pimp. Note the picture down on the bottom left. If you can't see it, I'll tell you what it says. It says Marquine Jean-Baptiste. We watched a video of him. He has his name stamped on her back. Now for the big surprise. She's a 17-year-old girl that he has working the streets of Miami, no longer, had working streets all over the state of Florida. Indicators, again, of and signs of human trafficking. Distrust of law enforcement. They're scared to death of what the pimp thinks they're saying to us and afraid of the beating that they're going to get for talking to the police. And of course they're afraid of getting arrested, because if they get arrested, they can't make money, and that'll lead to another beating. There's always threats to the family of these victims of human trafficking, always the threats of hurting and killing the family. We hear that over and over and over again. They lack personal, everyday items. You're not going to see them with a backpack with combs and toothbrushes and personal items, identification, credit cards, things that we take for granted and carry with us wherever we go. A means of control by the pimp. They take all that. They actually hold it. We've had a case where we stopped one and she said, "Wait 1 minute." And calls her pimp. Her pimp comes up with a stack of IDs. "Hold on, which prostitute is this?" And hands over her ID. It really happens. Transportation. You're not going to find these victims of human trafficking with any means to drive around, to get around town. The pimp controls that. And they do that again as a means to control them. They frequently take them to areas that are unfamiliar to the victim. Again, trips to Tampa, trips to Miami. If you're from Tampa, bring them to Orlando. Because they want to take you away from whatever messed up piece of stability you had. They want to take you away from that. They want to take you to a completely unfamiliar area, again, just to maintain control over you. And they frequently move you. They never want you to get comfortable in one area. Domestic minor sex trafficking. I want to read you something I just thought was interesting. Came out of New York Magazine. The author was Jessica Lustig. Anyhow, it was a conversation between a pimp and a seemingly prostitute after her first encounter with a client, with a John. And the pimp says, "I'm a pimp and you're a hoe." "What do you mean I'm a hoe?" she asked. She knew the word only as an insult, as in, "You're nasty." "No," he said, "you're a money-making hoe." And she asked, "Is that good?" "Yeah," he told her, "that's good." This was the exchange between Lucilia and her pimp after she serviced her first client. She was only 13 years old. Each year, the Department of Justice, or currently, the Department of Justice estimates that there are between 100 and 300,000 at-risk juveniles that are at risk to being sucked into this world of domestic minor sex trafficking. So what is it? Well, they're a U.S. citizen, they're under age 18, they're engaged in a commercial sex act, and that's pretty broad. It's prostitution, exotic dancing, stripping, private parties, pornography, and then, of course, phone sex. Anything of the sexual nature to make money. What group, and the director mentioned this a moment ago, what group makes up the largest segment? It's these runaways and throwaways. They make up the largest segment of these victims of domestic minor sex trafficking. They're often going to come from abusive families. They're going to have previous sexual abuse. They're going to have very unstable environments. That's the largest segment that these pimps are able to draw from. Examples of domestic minor sex trafficking. A minor trading sex with an adult for a place to live. They call it survival sex. Of course, a pimp prostituting an adolescent. Parent trading their child for drugs. A parent allowing a child for sex in exchange for rent. So what in the world do these males have that they can lure these young girls into their world of prostitution? Remember, they come from environments where they've already been sexually abused in some cases. They come from broken homes in some cases. They lack attention, they lack affection, they lack assets. Maybe they're a poor, broken home where they're sexually abused. They're perfect pickings for these pimps. So once the pimp is able to lure these young girls into their world and give them attention, give them affection, give them assets, what is the process? What process do they use to gain control? Well, they begin the physical and the emotional abuse. They began frequently changing the identity, giving them nicknames. They're no longer Sarah, they're Jessica. And they're always Sarah, they're never Jessica. Start stripping away their identity. Isolate them from anything they may have known before to things that are unknown to them. Threats and intimidation begin. And then, of course, the random acts of violence. The grooming continues. It's an odd phenomenon, I guess, but they always seem to record the first sexual encounter with these juveniles. So they use that we hear it over and over again, as a means of blackmail to, again, gain control. They use the video as a means of blackmail to gain control of the minor. And then, of course, through physical and emotional abuse. They begin that systematic breakdown and get total control of these minors. We continue with the name-calling threats, the mind control, the nickname. We've erased their identity. We've created that dependency, how to walk, how to talk, how to eat. They've removed them from that family structure if they had any, or anything that they had known in the past. And then they begin this forced education. We see it over and over again. It's the only thing they do. If they're not out prostituting, they're watching pornography. In domestic minor sex trafficking, imagine the 14-year-old. That's all they do.
Brothel operation was busted in Orange County today, and new this hour we obtained some evidence showing how some of those women were threatened into having sex for money. We reported at 4 o'clock investigators raided 3 homes today in Apopka and Orlando, and at 5 we told you the suspected ringleaders are connected to other crimes in our area. Channel 9's Carla Ray was there for the raids and learned investigators are worried that these women who are accused might not testify because they're afraid for their lives.
I'm gonna get out and kick your ass, dog. I'm gonna ask you one more time, then I'm gonna get out, find you, and you up, okay?
While inside jail on a prior arrest, investigators say accused pimp Terrence Burks would call the women who were working for him and threaten their lives.
When I get out of this in 3 hours, if your ain't over there, I'm gonna find you and I'm gonna bust your.
So today, as the home investigators say Burks was running as a brothel was raided, no one caught inside would admit to anything illegal. Burks is not facing human trafficking charges because his victims won't cooperate with investigators.
Right now, they're not willing to testify, and it primarily comes out of fear. I mean, you have to put yourself in their position where they've been drugged, they've been beaten, they've been humiliated.
One woman who was released from the home told us she was in fear for her life.
Ma'am, are you afraid that they're going to come after you?
They will come after me. It's not afraid. Please.
Burks has a lengthy criminal history, including several trips to prison.
When I get out, if your ain't there like I told you, because my bond and shit already posted, I'm gonna break your mother nest.
Carla Ray, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
Who is this pimp, this master manipulator, this opponent, this guy that we're up against? He's an expert at finding the weaknesses and the vulnerabilities. He also because he's an expert at finding those weaknesses, he provides these immediate needs, as food, shelter, and clothing to these young girls and in some cases adults. Remember the environment that he's picking from: abused, broken families, everything bad you can imagine. That's the pickings he's picking from. He understands that any attention and any affection is going to be welcomed by this potential victim of human trafficking. He connects with the victims. In some cases, they're looking for excitement. He'll give them excitement. Talk a little bit about the characteristics of the victims. Remember, they come from these environments where they've been sexually abused, they've been mistreated, so they're attracted to areas that are familiar to them, where they'll be accepted, even if that's where they're going to be sold and abused. They come from the history of abuse and neglect, so they're primed for these predatory pimps. They already consider themselves damaged. These victims develop a traumatic bond with the pimp. It's hard to understand. I could go from case to case to case to try to give you good examples, but they think that if they love him enough that he'll begin to treat them better. They actually like these guys. And then in this twisted piece of psychology, as these pimps are manipulating these victims of human trafficking, they convince them that it's their choice to stay, when in fact it's not. Florida, now talk about some of the resources that we have at our disposal. The Florida Safe Harbor Act, what is it? It's a piece of legislation signed into law, came by Governor Scott, went into effect January 1st, 2013. What it does, it allows law enforcement. In the past, we didn't have a whole bunch of tools at our disposal as to what do we do with a 14-year-old prostitute. Well, the Florida Safe Harbor Act allows us to classify those that we arrest for prostitution that are 14, and we have some indication that they're being trafficked, as dependent as opposed to delinquent. Now that's juvenile justice terms, so as dependent instead of being a criminal, So it gives us that power. It also gives DCF some power to start using some of the assets that they have to house some of these victims of human trafficking, the juveniles. And I already said this, it gives us that discretion. Once we've identified a potential victim of sex trafficking, a juvenile victim of sex trafficking. It allows us to not arrest them, to take them directly to DCF. The Act also gives DCF the tools and the resources to take them and put them in housing and start providing the resources they need to help. And by the way, one of the questions will always be, well, how many beds do you have for the juveniles? We're not struggling with the juveniles, but we are struggling with the adults, by the way, to find short and long-term care for them. What do? You be alert. You look for some of these signs and some of these indicators. It's not all inclusive, but those are that's a pretty good start. Be aware that you may come in contact with any one of these victims, maybe at a restaurant, maybe in the mall, maybe at a hotel when you're on vacation. And don't believe that it's not happening here, because it is, but it's also happening everywhere in the country. So be alert. Again, I'd like to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day. I wish we could spend 3 hours and go detail by detail by detail, but that wasn't how we were geared for this session. But we are available here at the MBI and the Orange County Sheriff's Office to come to you and give you whatever information we can give you to help you be better at recognizing and then, of course, investigating crimes of human trafficking. Some numbers that you can call in the event, for additional resources. In an emergency, clearly 911, the Florida Abuse Hotline, Crime Line for tips. We love Crime Line. We get every kind of tip known to man. And the National Human Traffic Resource Center, a great resource for additional information. And we have a few minutes remaining. So we're available here for any questions. If anyone has any questions that they would like to ask regarding human trafficking or anything in MBI's bucket.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's take advantage of this offer for 2 speakers to take questions from the audience. I believe we have some microphones available. I think Eric's got one there. So please, take advantage of their talents and expertise. Gentlemen, if you don't mind, I'm going to throw out the first question. Okay. Just kind of find the pump here. When you look at these individuals who are behind these crimes, and let's face it, this is a very uncomfortable subject, but these folks are master manipulators, like you said, Lieutenant. They are canvassing the most purient of appetites of society.
Turn these.
Are the sentences stiff enough for these folks? Okay.
Well, first of all, we've got to get them into court, and we got to get them to the point where they're going to be prosecuted, which sometimes is difficult. But so far, the ones that we have been able to get into the court system and to the point of either a plea or a trial, we have been very successful. And I can give you some examples. There have been a couple here. There was one of our earlier ones a couple years ago where this individual was actually doing this here in Tampa, and the federal trial was in Tampa. He got sentenced to life in prison, in fact, multiple life sentences in the federal system. The trials that we had a couple weeks ago in the federal system, they go to sentencing next month, I believe, and we think they're going to get substantial sentences as well. But also in the state and in the Ninth Circuit as well. When we get them to the point where we get a conviction, they're getting stiff sentences. So we're pretty happy with how that's working so far.
That's good. So both in statute as well as in practice with the courts, you're seeing some very strong sentences.
Absolutely.
Great. Okay, some questions.
Just recently, I happened to be visiting a business on OBT, and I was totally shocked. There was a pimp on the corner, and there was a young girl, obviously, very young. You could tell she was a teenager, and she obviously had practically no clothes on. She was, it's just a busy intersection of OBT and a major crossroad, and I didn't know what to do. I wanted to call, so I tried to, I didn't know who to call. How would you get there in time to get them? Because I'm just driving by. So my question is for the community. I don't live in the OBT, but I was driving through. And what do you recommend we do for a case like that? Because by the time my call gets to some place, she wouldn't be there anymore.
Great question. Gentlemen?
Go ahead.
It's not going to be, or it hasn't been, an uncommon sight to have prostitutes on Orange Blossom Trail. What do you do if you see one? Especially, what do you do if you see one with someone that looks like has a pimp next to them? Of course, you can call 911. That's your first resource. Call the sheriff's office. We control pretty much all of Orange Blossom Trail. Some sections are the Orlando Police Department, but call 911. We do respond to those. And just so you know, not only does MBI, but the Orange County Sheriff's Office and the Orlando Police Department are continuously, almost daily, sometimes twice a day, doing operations up and down Orange Blossom Trail and some of the other areas that there may be some high prevalence of prostitution. So it's something that is in the forefront of our radar, and we are working it nonstop every single day. But in those cases, just to be clear, if you see something that really hits your radar and you really think, hey, something's wrong with that picture, call 911. Call 911 and a deputy, in most cases on the trail, or one of the municipal police officers will respond.
Yeah, don't hesitate, because she might be gone by the time we get there, but she's going to be out there again, and you've given us that description. We're eventually going to catch up with her. So don't hesitate to call.
Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, we have talked a lot about the basic population engaged in human trafficking in Florida, and particularly in Orange County. And I think the director mentioned the question that, well, this is a tourist economy, so we have millions of people coming in here. What is the MBI doing to give and to put out there that Orlando, Orange County is not a haven for human trafficking? If you could speak particularly to what measures the MBI is doing as so far as the tourist community is concerned.
Well, I think the main thing is the training that we're doing for the tourist industry, for them, telling them what to look for so that they can call us and we can come out there and do something about it. So basically, we're the training that we're doing and responding to the calls that we get from the tourist industry to get the word out there that's not acceptable. I can tell you, there's a hotel on I-Drive, I'm not going to tell you which one, where they invite us to come to the hotel to do these operations because they want the word to get out to the escort population that don't come to this hotel because MBI does operations here all the time and the hotel welcomes us to do it. So there's different ways of doing it, but that's one of the ways is the training and getting the word out there that way through the tourism industry.
We need the eyes, we need the involvement. Great question. Karen, another one over here on the front.
Yes, you mentioned that the pimps are at the bus stations to meet the girls when they get off the bus. With the Florida Safe Harbor Act, is there a provision to allow for victim services or DCF or somebody else to have people also stationed at the bus station to kind of intercept that act?
That's currently that's not something that we do that I know of, but that is something that we could take a look at. But I do know that, like I said, all the training that we do with law enforcement, they know what to look for. So a lot of times there's off-duty officers that work those areas, and they see things like that, and we get phone calls all the time from law enforcement.
That seems like it would be a good position to have somebody there.
Yeah, that sounds like a good idea.
And if I could just add that, in all of our investigations, DCF is a close 1-inch bias. They go with us on all of our contacts with the victims, so that we bring with us not only the criminal investigation, but all the social services necessary to get that person out of that environment. So they're always with us.
I'm hoping that this is one of what people need to get into, because that's my
Over here. Thank you.
Good morning. I have a question. I saw something very interesting in the video, and certainly this isn't to ask to divulge sensitive information, but it seems like a huge piece to kind of hear from the Johns and approach it from a John standpoint as well. And I saw that in the video, for example, there was a recording. Could you maybe share how you're able to kind of tap into those resources and kind of hear from them, pretty much implicating themselves and making specific threats to prostitutes or those who've been human trafficked that are out there and, of course, awaiting their release?
There are techniques that we use within the law enforcement community that we're allowed to, that we can capture conversations. That's about as broad as we can go on that. But be assured that everything at our disposal we use to when we're conducting our criminal investigations, so we can lock these predators up for a long, long time. And I think the director hit on that. We are getting pretty good sentences on these predators. So did that kind of answer your question? We use every tool at our disposal.
Time for one more question.
Gentlemen, thanks for the presentation, by the way. You probably know recently we've identified like fire and EMS and also emergency departments in the community as being sort of a landing point for these victims, where they're not necessarily breaking a crime, but maybe an opportunity to interface with them. And obviously it's difficult to try to get them to break those bonds and actually speak up, but it's certainly an opportunity. We're starting to do some education on that front. Are there other areas, these sort of ancillary areas that surround victims, where you think they might bubble up to the surface of the community, where we have an opportunity to say, hey, here's an opportunity to let us know what's going on, other than when they get arrested or so forth?
Some examples that I can think of off the top of my head is emergency rooms and doctors and nurses, the training that we've been doing with them, because a lot of times these pimps go overboard and they beat them to the point where they need to take them to the emergency room. So sometimes the training that we've done with them and we continue to do, they see the signs, and that's another way that we can identify victims. That's one I can think of right off the top of my head. Any other? Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Well, I think one more question. I'm sorry, one more. Karen's got her roller skates on.
Yes, good morning. Just have a question. You mentioned a lot of collaboration and training with participating law enforcement agencies. So my question to you is, 1 hour of block training with these agents, is that enough to deal with this problem?
20 hours may not be enough. But it exposes them to that initial, those initial indicators as to what to do. Once they see something that, and in law enforcement we have a funny way of recognizing things that are just strange or odd, and I would stop short of characterizing it as 1 hour of training in their annual block training. It's an introduction. Hey guys, this is happening out there in your community. Here are the indicators that you could be looking for, and if you see them, call these people immediately. So while we're not training them to be in-depth, long-term investigators, it is sufficient for the time being. It is sufficient to train them on some of the indicators, some of the environmental, some things that they may see, what environment are they in, and then, of course, training them to give the investigators a call so we can come out. And we probably respond out to a few a day, which is as many as any investigative unit that I know of. So it has worked. It has worked. The training has worked.
And if I can add, an hour doesn't seem like a whole lot for the patrol officers, but the agents and the investigators that actually do the investigation go to weeks and weeks of training, and they constantly go to conferences to get updated on trends and things like that. So they get a lot of training, the ones that actually do the investigation.
Last weekend, a friend of mine who has been participating in some training with a police sheriff and so forth gave me some very disturbing information. She's saying that after these young people, girls, boys, are abused and of no longer use for the sexual stuff, then they're used for going door to door, that type of thing, and then when they're of no use for whatever type of slave labor that they put them to, then they do Organ harvesting.
News to me.
Yeah, those are things that we haven't been briefed on. The intel doesn't necessarily. Sure. The intelligence that we're getting doesn't go that far. If there is intelligence out there, we would love to get it because we would love to look into it. But at this point, the intelligence that we collect doesn't go that far.
And we work very closely with Orange County OPD's homicide unit and other investigators, and anything that leads in any other type of crime, we're working very closely with them. We communicate back and forth. So let's say a homicide did come up that was related to human trafficking. Believe me, we're communicating and we're working that. But as far as that particular, I haven't come across that in a while, that I haven't heard that.
Gentlemen, you've definitely piqued the interest of our audience. If you have time for another question?
Sure.
Lieutenant Michael, quick question. Those pimps, they are Americans?
The photographs that we showed, they are Americans, that's correct.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Okay. Last one that closes out.
I'd like to know if you come out and do workshops in the community. I noticed you were showing different houses in the community, but if you came out to some of the communities and do workshops at homeowners meetings and things to alert us on what to look for, all right? That's never been done that I know of. But if you can work on just coming out, doing workshops, what we can look for to identify, then we might can help cut that down too. Like the guy said, it was a bunch of ladies there, and he didn't know what they were there for. So it's obvious if it's a bunch of women in one house, it's obvious, but we really can't identify with that. So if you guys can do workshops and let us know some things, that can be helpful too.
Absolutely. You know, all it takes is a phone call and an invitation, and we'll come out and talk to your organization. We do all sorts. There was a whole list there. We've done hundreds of presentations on human trafficking. We'd be glad to do that for Homeowners Association as well. And if there's just one thing I can add too, a lot of times I get asked is what resources do we need at MBI to do our job better? And I can tell you right now the resources we have at MBI as far as manpower and finances and things like that, I think we're doing good. We're keeping our head above water and keeping up with the investigations. But the biggest need is the social services. When we pull these victims from the situations that they're in, both adult and juveniles, getting them into the social services, the drug counseling, a place to stay, that's the biggest problem we have right now, is keeping that victim stable, because sometimes it takes a year or more for us to finish the investigation, for it to get to the point where we go to trial, and we have to have that victim to testify at trial. So right now, the social services are the weakest link in these investigations.
Lieutenant Gibson, anything to close from your vantage point?
No, in fact, we had talked about that, and that we agree that in terms of manpower, the sheriffs and police chief, a sheriff and police chiefs have been very good to us in terms of manpower. It seems early on, and it's getting better, increased funding and assistance in the social service arena.
Well, frightening problem, very complex one, but thank you so much for y'all's insight and time here this morning. Please join me in thanking Director Zwig and Lieutenant Gibson. Excellent job, gentlemen. Sheriff, I'm going to go off the reservation for just a second. Since I'm not a sworn officer, I'm not an officer of the court, and perhaps I was inspired a little bit by hearing the theme song from Clint Eastwood's movies earlier during Major Brown's. But I'm thinking if these folks who are behind the trafficking and the pimping, if they are so inclined to brand and tattoo some of their folks, perhaps we should turn the tables. And maybe they need a little bit of marking that says something like, "Pimp from prison, stay away from me," right here on the forehead. But gentlemen, excellent presentation. Folks, we are right on time, and before we give you your 15-minute break, I want to remind you that events like this do not happen by accident. We have a wonderful team behind the planning of this event and a wonderful team of sponsors that help make this event possible, and I want to recognize those businesses that provided financial support for today's program. Particularly, I want to recognize some of our largest supporters, including Mr. Dan Newland, attorney and CEO of Newland & Partners, CentraCare, Wawa, Darden for the bags you have this morning, Impact Sound Systems, the great team from Orange TV, and Star and Shield. Please join me in thanking all of our supporters and sponsors today.